ni que llama adelante una persona que nos tour conoce. Joana, mi amira, mi hace express para mi mire cara, no, no, e persona no llama Joana. Mi que llama adelante un Oradó for de Hulanda, professor, Dr. Joana Duarte. Joana Duarte está professor com nombramento especial de cidadania global e educação bilíngue na Universidade de Amsterdam, cátedra de Nuffic, e professor de multilinguismo na Universidade de Ciência Aplicada, NHL, Stenden, e na Universidade de Groningen. Sua área principal de investigação está educação multilingual, desenvolvimento profissional de docente, igualdade de educação, cidadania global e justiça social. Sua última publicação, com un capítulo tocante manejo de idioma na Hulanda caribense, está e-book que tiene como título de una les consciente tocante importância de idioma. Trabaja con diversidad lingüístico de enseñanza básico. Título de su discurso: una estructura de justicia social para situación postkolonial e caso de educación multilingual y papiamentu na Hulanda caribense. Professor Dr. Joana Duarte, pode passar adiante.
Boa tarde, gente. Well, while we're still waiting for the slides, maybe I can take 2 minutes to thank the Fundación Académica Papiamentu for bringing me over from the other side of the planet where it's very cold and raining, because it's an honor for me to talk to you about multilingual education and how we may learn with each other and how it may apply to the situation of Bonaire and its wonderful language, papiamentu. I also would like to thank the authors of the insightful report that I've read with a lot of pleasure, and that is, of course, on the basis of what I will say today. So I will start with a small introduction about the current situation, and I will only focus on education in Bonaire. So we know that the education system has the remnants of its colonial past/present, and has been described as a stubborn colonial legacy, right? And that means that it's very much based on language hierarchies in education and in society, and it's shaped by monolingual ideologies that favor the colonial language and that clash with the multilingual realities of the students and their families. And this leads to disparities in educational opportunities. So disparities in participation. And we can see this in the high levels of school dropout in high school in Bonaire, for example. We also know about globalization, global markets, and the so-called neoliberalism and neoliberal orientations that are pushing the young generations to disconnect with their main home language, papiamentu, but also with their local identities. And from what I've gathered from the situation so far, there's also polarization going on. So there are people that believe that Dutch is actually allowing access to knowledge and higher education, educated population, which to a great extent has not been realized in practice yet. And there is a new rising movement, and I think we are sitting in front of it, or I am actually standing in front of it, towards more literacy-based papiamentu in education. And I was wondering, how can we connect this situation to current trends in education policies in the Netherlands? Because we must go with the flow and take the trains that are offered to us on our trip. And I must tell you, the Netherlands is the #1 country in educational inequality. In all the international monitoring studies, there goes the Netherlands. They're high on educational equality. But since 2020 and COVID has played a major role on it, the government has said, okay, we really must address this problem. We must do something to embrace diversity, to create inclusive language environments, to fight educational inequality. So all these books have been published in the last year, addressing kansengelijkheid, education equality, and all the major players that shape education policies have brought out wonderful strategic agendas and whatever, all of them targeting educational equity, embracing diversity, embracing multilingualism. Apart from that, there is a new education law since 2021, focusing all on citizenship education, on living in a multilingual, multicultural society, on embracing diversity, and there will be a new curriculum coming, curriculum.nu, that is based on multilingualism, language awareness, and intercultural communicative competence. Something that I think you are all masters in, and that Dutch people in European Netherlands could learn from you, actually. So all in all, it is the ideal moment to talk about and to innovate language policies in Bonairean education, also in the wider context of fighting rising educational inequality in the Netherlands. Because at the moment there is a call for inclusive education, there is rising awareness towards the need for a different approach towards linguistic and cultural diversity. We feel it all throughout the Netherlands, also in the teacher training where I am teaching. And there will be a new curriculum, and there is already a new law with the focus on citizenship education, on multilingualism and cultural awareness. So Bonaire has the opportunity to have a leading role in showing the rest of the Netherlands how inclusive education can be shaped. But we also know that the exclusion of minority or minoritized languages is just as much a process of social engineering as their promotion. So how can we engineer an education system that is based on embracing diversity and multilingualism? And I've compiled what I could for the 15 minutes that I have, everything that I know about multilingual education, in order to come to 4 recommendations for education in Bonaire. So when we talk about multilingualism in education, there is also always a binary dichotomy between the so-called swim or sink models, meaning you immerse the poor students in one main language and you keep immersing them, and of course a small minority swims without help, but the larger majority just sings throughout the education system as they are not able to catch up with the language as quickly. On the other hand, there's the umbrella term, that's why it's the umbrella, not because it's raining, of multilingual education, which means broadly acknowledging and using all the languages of the pupils and the community around them. Now, there have been studies. What is more effective, the swim or sink methods or multilingual education? And the sociologist Orhan Agidak, he studied the effects of extra Dutch, remedial Dutch, and having 4 to 6 hours of Dutch a week more in comparison to having mother tongue education 4 to 6 hours a week. And he found that the students that were getting more and more and more Dutch, they were underperforming significantly in comparison to their peers that were not getting any extra Dutch. Whereas the students that were receiving mother tongue education 4 to 6 hours a week were really performing above average and were having lots of gains also for the Dutch language. So when you have the two compared, then empirical evidence suggests invest in multilingual education, not in extra Dutch and not in remedial Dutch. But of course, how will we invest? Well, research says you have to go for long-term planning. If the main language of society is not the second language, which is the case in Bonaire, so you are not immersed in a society in which Dutch dominates, papiamentu dominates the interpersonal communications, we've learned this from the report, then you need at least 5 or 6 years of exposure to a bilingual or trilingual or a multilingual model. And Colin Baker also says, think about the ideologies and the ideas behind the models that you choose, and he suggests that you should go for strong forms of bi- or multilingual education, meaning that they are aimed at maintenance, enrichment, bi- or multiliteracy, and high expectations. So not all models are suitable, but those that are strong, that are aiming at multiliteracy, might be. So we've tested this in Friesland, where I work, where there's also a minoritized language, Frisian, competing a little bit with Dutch and English, obviously. And we've created 85 primary schools that are trilingual based on the principles of additive multilingualism, not subtractive, transfer of language skills from one language to the other, and interactive pedagogy. There is, however, a conscious and consistent separation of the languages of instruction. And we see that Frisian, Dutch, and English are taught as a subject, but are also used as a medium of instruction to teach mathematics or history or whatever. And we see that alphabetization is done mostly in Frisian and Dutch, and then gradually English takes a bigger role in the older grades. And of course, we evaluated the results in a very big, large longitudinal study. And we found that compared to the control schools, pupils from these trilingual schools, and the control schools had no trilingual system, they had much better Frisian proficiency. They had similar Dutch language proficiency to all the other kids in the region, although they had half of the teaching time in Dutch. So, nota bene, quantity is not quality. And they had similar English proficiency, but more confidence and ease in speaking. So we found positive effects on language development, on the self-confidence of pupils and empowerment in terms of their multilingual identities. And we also found positive attitudes towards Frisian of non-native speakers involved in the schools. However, teachers complained that they lacked appropriate materials, that there was a transition gap between primary and secondary education, so the long-term planning was not really considered. And they complained about the outdated language model that was very much based on language separation, monolingual ideologies, and also on an implicit depreciation of translanguaging, meaning the use of several languages at the same time in the communication within the school. So we can use this to improve the system. And my first recommendation for Bonairean education would be to create a at least trilingual system, if not multilingual, with gradual differences in the languages and a very early foreign language. In this case, I would go for Spanish, obviously. The children should be alphabetized in papiamentu and also in Dutch. Languages should be used both as a subject and as a medium of instruction. For example, using CLIL, content and language integrated learning, so content and language integrated into one subject. Dutch should be taught as a foreign language, also using some kind of CLIL methodology, and the aims should be high expectations. Multilingualism, multiliteracy with a long-term planning. This according to research. Okay, but how do you do this? Well, you can resort to, for example, using pedagogical translanguaging. That is a theoretical, but also an instructional approach that aims at improving language and content competencies in school context by using resources from the learner's whole linguistic repertoire. So you activate what the students already know and can do, and you expand it for language learning and for content learning. Now, I am unfortunately not yet an expert in papiamentu, but I was researching and trying to learn, and if you look at this list of adjective, noun, word order in papiamentu in Dutch, you can easily see how translanguaging could be applied so that students talking to each other in papiamentu about these sentences can actually figure out the rules for adjective and noun word order in papiamentu by analyzing the sentences and the position of the adjective and the noun in the sentence. So you can build in what Senos and Horta call translanguaging spaces, in which children can relax, use their home language to engage cognitively in learning languages and across languages. So Senos and Gorta suggest that translanguaging spaces are a kind of a life-saving buoy in the swim or sink models that give students a sense of security while learning. So the second recommendation would be embrace pupils' natural multilingualism instead of trying to suppress half or more than the half of their multilingualism and try to make them into native speakers of one language instead of embracing their multilingualism. Create translanguaging spaces. You can see them there, like connecting the languages, right? And work on the intentional use of several languages in certain parts of the curriculum. My example was for grammar in this case, but you can use it for everything, obviously. Okay, so we are going for a tri or multilingual system. We are going to include translanguaging, but how do we know that it works? Well, we can look at research that has been conducted in successful interventions that also aimed at multilingual education. And I went to this school and I talked to the director, so that's why I always bring this example of the Tollgate Primary School in a suburb of London, very poor area. You can see the pupils here. And in 1997, they were really underachieving. Only 36% of the pupils passed the national exam, kind of like the CITO, for English and 53 for mathematics. So the director was panicking. What shall I do? So they decided to innovate, to develop an intervention towards multilingual education. What did they do? They recruited multilingual staff. They invested in whole school training, meeting the multilingual needs of their pupils. They changed policy guides. They encouraged home language use. And they developed fixed strategies like the so-called home language pairs, so that students could also work in pairs sharing the same home language. And what happened was that 4 years later, 86% of the pupils passed the exam of English and 94% of mathematics, which was a huge difference. And this is just one story of many successful stories in the field of multilingual education. So my third recommendation would be develop the curricula, the materials, in co-creation with teachers and schools, with professionals. For example, working in learning communities, where you exchange knowledge, you exchange materials, you have an online platform where everyone has access to everything that is developed. So work on teachers' professional development, but also on their ideologies towards languages and multilingual approaches. And also monitor the intervention so that you know, okay, what works we can upscale, what doesn't work we can downscale or eliminate, and this way you keep optimizing your model. And I come to my last point on postkolonialism. We conducted some research on citizenship education. Of course, language was mentioned by everyone that we interviewed. We did it on Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba. There is an article coming, and I brought you 2 quotes from our data. The first one was a teacher complaining that the Netherlands is always sending the materials, and if not the Netherlands, then it's Europe. And that there is an outdated way of treating our history, I'm saying your history, and your way of telling your history, and also outdated words. Another teacher says, well, difference between the white citizen and the black citizen, which does not exist on paper. So you know that gap. But it's a colonial fear with most blacks within Caribbean. It's about history, and so I understand what it's coming from. So racial issues do need to be addressed. And I think we shy away from them. And this we saw in all the data. Many things being brought up, but not being treated explicitly. So Nelson Maldonado suggests addressing post-colonial issues explicitly in education. And he suggests a framework of decoloniality that aims at dismantling the power relations and conceptions of knowledge that foment the reproduction of racial, gender, and geopolitical hierarchies. It is consciously acknowledging and acting aware of power dynamics. And power dynamics. And he sees it as an addition to a social justice framework that is aiming at embracing diversity and at inclusion, because it is about changed powers. So my final recommendation would be address issues of postcolonialism, neoliberalism, or globalization, and inequality explicitly in education. Don't shy away from them. And aim at dismantling the power relations or exposing them to acknowledge diversity and foster inclusion, so the social justice part, but also to reflect on changed power structures, so the decoloniality part. So in sum, I have tried to show you that the recent developments in research in the Netherlands can boost innovations based on multilingualism and inclusion in Bonaire that may help prioritize education in papiamentu. Our evidence-informed suggestions, which are in line with the report, are to create a strong long-term tri- or multilingual system aiming at multiliteracy and alphabetizing pupils in papiamentu, embracing pupils' natural multilingualism by using translanguaging spaces, working with professions on a shared vision for and ideologies towards multilingual education, and including principles of social justice and decoloniality. One last piece of advice is do not reinvent the wheel, like what they are doing, but take the time to make it, of course, your own wheel and be ahead of the innovations. And I finish with a quote again from our data, because I don't have all the answers, but I hope that you together will find the answers to these questions. This interviewee says, so you have to learn how to deal with the reality and live with the reality. But also, how do we work together? How do we look past the racial differences, past the history, and make a better future or present? And while I don't have the answers, I'm convinced that you will have the answers soon and can share with the rest of the Netherlands so that we can learn from you. Masha danki.